The Guardians of the Galaxy films have always been among the Marvel Cinematic Universe's most sincere adventures. While sure, these James Gunn movies are silly outer space adventures featuring wisecracking protagonists that throw around one-liners with wanton abandon, like an Oprah that could chuck cars at her audience, the Guardians of the Galaxy movies feature a strong emotional core that can sucker punch even the most stoic audience member into leaking a few tears. Its stories involving a ragtag spacefaring crew, the one known as the Guardians of the Galaxy, are emotionally heartfelt and have great characters such as Chris Pratt's Peter Quill, aka Star-Lord, who was a human man-child that was abducted by aliens back when he was a small kid. There's the warrior in Zoe Saldana's Gamora, no relation, who is the fierce daughter of Thanos and is also Peter's love interest. The cyborg in Karen Gillan's Nebula, i.e. Thanos' other daughter who has understandable anger issues. Dave Bautista's Drax the Destroyer, a being that is fierce on the battlefield even though he doesn't understand the concept of a metaphor or sarcasm, which, to be fair, I can relate. Sarcasm really can go over my head because I can dish it out, but I sure as shit can't take it. Then there's Palm Clementi's Mantis, who is an empath that can feel and influence other people's emotional states. Then there's Bradley Cooper's Rocket, which... Sorry, I should have checked the phrasing on that before saying that out loud, who is a foul-mouthed, gun-toting raccoon, which is a lovely aesthetic both visually and personally. And then there's Groot, a loving and living tree being who primarily only says 3 words, which is funny because he is voiced by Vin Diesel in a minimalist performance that still somehow earns him the big bucks. But still, I'm okay with that because Groot is adorable. And between all of the Guardians of the Galaxy, they are a juicy cocktail of varying personalities and emotional states. On the one hand, they can be endearing and humorous, but on the other side, they can be very vulnerable. After all, they clearly have issues ranging from abandonment, abuse, and other problems. And over the course of 2 movies, and even appearances in other films like the most recent Avengers Adventures, their brief stint in Thor Love and Thunder, and in the Guardians Holiday Special, which was a 45-minute adventure where Mantis and Drax kidnapped Kevin Bacon, because of course, why the fuck not? These characters have been through the emotional ringer, but have always come out stronger, mostly because they have each other's emotional support, realizing that even though they endure extremely tough personal circumstances, they all have each other's back. They have come to realize that the Guardians of the Galaxy are their family, and they trust each other. And as dysfunctional as all of these characters are, there is love within this oddball family. And honestly, that is the heart of the Guardians of the Galaxy series and characters. I adore them. With that being said, however, there were some question marks surrounding the recently released Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. For one thing, this was a post-Avengers Endgame project, which posed some concerns when it came to the character of Gamora. After all, Thanos killed the original Gamora in Avengers Infinity War, and the new Gamora that took her place post-Avengers Endgame is a different version of Gamora from an earlier timeline, meaning that she was a different person, someone who didn't experience what happened to the original Gamora in the Guardians of the Galaxy films, someone who never loved Peter Quill. And with Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, there was a question as to how the movie would handle this, and whether or not Gamora could still be an effective character. Additionally, the run-up to Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3's release saw a lot of headlines pertaining to the status of director James Gunn, i.e. the guy who has directed all of the Guardians of the Galaxy films, as well as many of the cast like Dave Bautista, in how Guardians 3 would be both Gunn's and Bautista's last go-around with the Guardians franchise, as well as the MCU as a whole. After all, James Gunn is now heading up the upcoming DCU, i.e. the to-be-dated comic book universe owned by Warner Brothers meant to rival the MCU, and Bautista stated that he did not want Drax the Destroyer to define his career, and that Guardians 3 would probably be his last go-around. Furthermore, Zoe Saldana said that Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 would be her last time playing Gamora, and the status of most of the other actors and whether or not they are returning is up in the air as well. And given that, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3's pre-release made the film feel like it was a farewell tour for the franchise, or at least the series as we knew it, especially given the departures of some of its talent, including the man who directed and helped pen all 3 films. It felt like it would be the series' last hurrah. Thankfully though, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 handles all of these items exceptionally well. In terms of Gamora, the character is integrated into the themes and story exceptionally well, for reasons that I will soon explain, and in terms of this being James Gunn's and other cast members' swan song to the series, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 has a feeling of finality that permeates its narrative and thematic storytelling, something that is often missing from the Marvel Cinematic Universe style comic book continuity that is meant to go on forever in perpetuity, even even though that goes against the core tenets of time itself. Like all things do eventually end, except for Twinkies, because those things last for fucking ever. They never expire. And Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 feels like an ending of sorts. While some characters will continue to exist in the broader MCU, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 is the conclusion to the property as we know it. And wow, what a glorious and spectacular conclusion it is. See, the movie is a terrific send-off to these characters that we love so much, and is easily the greatest Volume 3 of anything since Slipknot's The Subliminal Verses, because we're just respecting game here. Because Guardians 3 is just fantastic like that. Much of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3's success is due to its heartfelt and resonant story. The plot follows the earlier mentioned Guardians of the Galaxy as they try to settle on their new home of nowhere, i.e. a city located inside the deceased decapitated head of a giant celestial god that is floating in deep space. Which is admittedly kind of depressing, but also fun, yet nothing is as picture perfect as the Guardians would like. In fact, they all have their own issues and nuances. Hell, even Sean Gunn's Kraglin has imposter syndrome after his Captain Yondu died in the previous Guardians movie, a problem that even the intelligent telepathic golden retriever named Cosmo, i.e. the one voiced by Maria Bakalova, can't help with, and that's saying something. Like, do you know how much golden retrievers love people? Like, there is love, and then there's the golden retriever who wants to hug you like a giant teddy bear. And if a golden retriever just existing in the same sphere as Kraglin doesn't help him, then not much else will. But anyway, what I'm trying to say is that even Sean Gunn's character has problems he must overcome, just like the rest of the Guardians of the Galaxy. Yet Volume 3's two most narratively and thematically important character journeys involve Peter and Rocket. Peter is still majorly depressed about Gamora's death, and Rocket carries the burden of past trauma with him, a deep pain in regards to his past and origin that he has never fully explained to the rest of his teammates and family. And for both Peter and Rocket, it's an unhealthy status quo, one where a self-pitying Peter gets shit-faced on alien alcohol, and one where Rocket keeps his pain to himself. However, Rocket's and Peter's status quo is eventually upended when the Guardians of the Galaxy are attacked in nowhere, i.e. a city located inside of a deceased decapitated head of a giant celestial god that is floating in deep space, rather than a nondescript nowhere like Nebraska. I trust that you know this, but I wanted to make sure, and I also wanted to make fun of Nebraska, because why not? At nowhere, the Guardians are violently assaulted by Will Poulter's Adam Warlock, a superpowered being whose parent is Elizabeth Debicki's Aisha, i.e. the leader of the golden alien race dubbed the Sovereign, no relation, that were heavily present in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2's narrative and also do return in Volume 3. See, the Sovereign were created and genetically engineered by a megalomaniacal man dubbed the High Evolutionary. Played by Chukwudi Iwuji, the High Evolutionary is a man with no empathy who has the goal of creating a perfect alien race who would then live in a utopic society. And he often attempts to achieve this goal by venturing into the realm of unethical experimentation, including on animals, including on Rocket. Yes, the High Evolutionary is Rocket's creator, and for an unknown reason the High Evolutionary wants Rocket back in a body bag, hence why during Adam Warlock's attack, Rocket is severely injured and has a proprietary kill switch inside his brain activated that will kill him in 48 hours. And from there, the rapscallious Guardians of the Galaxy come together, Gamora begrudgingly reunites with the team, and they all formulate a plan to deactivate the kill switch, all while we learn about Rocket's backstory through flashbacks, as well as meet important characters from Rocket's past like Linda Cardellini's Lila, and discover the truth that the High Evolutionary wants for himself. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 is a very intelligently crafted Marvel Cinematic Universe film. In fact, it has intelligent design, if you will. On the surface, it's a fun Marvel movie with lots of CGI battle sequences, witty banter, and a kick-ass soundtrack, even if it could use more metal. I mean, come on, metal is just the greatest music in the universe. Up your game, James Gunn. I find your lack of bong gripper disturbing. But anyway, the point. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 is on the surface a silly yet fun sci-fi movie, but like the other Guardians of the Galaxy films, it has a strong and deep emotional core that gives the rest of the movie a heavy thematic weight. The movie just has a lot of heart, mostly because it has layered themes about abuse, grief, and trauma. In fact, there is a lot to analyze here and to connect with if you have experienced these intense emotions, because I know I did. bad. Like, there's a lot of relevant, strong themes here. For one thing, Star-Lord is grieving over the loss of Gamora and needs to accept that nothing lasts forever and that things change. That's the Gamora that exists and lives now is not the same Gamora that's lived and loved him before, which is a truth that's painful for him. Adam Warlock and Aisha are an example of how abuse can be passed down through generations, and Rocket went through extensive trauma, yet needs to understand that that said trauma does not need to define him. That even though he was made through cruel experimentation and the person that created him is horrible, Rocket is still his own person and his life has meaning beyond what happened to him. And that's something that affects Rocket's perception of his family as well, because despite how he is technically a product of the High Evolutionary, Rocket is ultimately the one who decides who his family is. He has autonomy over this. That even though the hands that created Rocket are cruel and evil, Rocket's creator is not his family. Instead, the Guardians of the Galaxy are the ones who love and support him. And that last arc involving Rocket's trauma and how he gets to choose who his family is especially relevant because it harkens back to the Guardians of the Galaxy's core theme about how chosen family, i.e. the people we associate as family despite not being related by blood, and how they for themselves can determine who is their family and who is worthy of love and trust, which, you know, has been a big overarching theme for this whole franchise ever since the first movie. And honestly, Rocket's arc in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 just further complements the series' core theme about found family, and it even expands upon it in a new way by showcasing the nuances of Rocket's battle with PTSD and how he navigates around loved ones even in spite of that said PTSD. It's a movie about how Rocket gets to choose who his family is and what he represents as a person, or a raccoon rather, even in the face of all the pain he faces. It's about how he alone gets to determine who he is even in spite of heavy traumatic baggage. And truly, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 portrays Rocket's trauma in an exceptionally well and nuanced way that allows many of us with PTSD to find his journey relatable. The movie truly does a terrific job here, and when combining Rocket's character arc with Peter's grief over Gamora and other character developments, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 just really nails all of its thoughtful themes. It really cuts to the core of grief, abuse, and trauma, and tells a truly resonant story that cuts to the bone of these depthful and evocative topics with expert precision. And for that, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 is heartfelt and often a tearjerker. Of course, one of the reasons why Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3's themes work so well is due to its villain, the High Evolutionary. And to be clear, that man is a truly hateable presence. After all, he is a eugenicist who views all of his creations as disposable, even despite how they are living beings with their own personal agency. He is a horrible man who just does not care about anyone that he views as beneath him, just like Mr. Peanut, that capitalistic fuck. And honestly, that's why the High Evolutionary works so well as an antagonist for this movie. After all, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 is about grief, abuse, and trauma, and those trying to overcome them. It's a movie about having empathy for people that are going through these emotionally turbulent experiences. And given that the High Evolutionary is a man without that said empathy, the emotional contrast between the heroes and the antagonists heighten both the good moral attributes of our protagonist, all while highlighting how vile its antagonist is. Hell, the High Evolutionary, and many who work for them, is so detestable that I didn't even question when or why the Guardians of the Galaxy used lethal force against the High Evolutionary's goon squad. Like in other Marvel movies, sometimes I wonder whether or not killing hapless henchmen is technically justified. But in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, when Star-Lord absolutely pulverizes a baddie, I was just left wishing that there was more blood splatter. Because fuck that person, and fuck the High Evolutionary too. I hate them, which means the movie did a good job here. I was really cheering against them. Additionally, the High Evolutionary works as a villain due to how he is a strong critique against Disney, i.e. the studio that is financially backing Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. After all, the High Evolutionary has a callous disregard for the beings he creates, which is similar to how Disney can also have a callous disregard for its IP and the people that create them, people including director James Gunn, because, if you remember from a few years ago, James Gunn was originally fired from Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3's production after the conservative culture war targeted him due to how he used his online platform to criticize then-President Donald Trump and the GOP as a whole. And in order for them to quote-unquote cancel Gunn, the culture war weirdos weaponized some of Gunn's admittedly distasteful past tweets against him, which was a strategy that conservatives had used before and honestly was not new MCU at the time. In fact, conservative activist and noted conspiracy theorist Mike Cernovich had used a similar tack using old tweets against other people before, against other progressive critics. It was a known tactic, and when it came to James Gunn, Cernovich was the one who spearheaded the movement, which was telling because keep in mind, Cernovich was one of the guys who pushed Pizzagate, i.e. the conspiracy theory where Hillary Clinton ran a child molestation ring out of a Washington, D.C. area pizza joint's basement, which turned out to be false both on the counts of Hillary Clinton running a child sex thing, as well as the fact that that location in question didn't even have a fucking basement, because truly, that Mike Cernovich is a real son of a bitch. And so yeah, the man was untrustworthy and had an agenda, yet when he exposed Gunn's old tweets, there was a whole conservative backlash using those said tweets to take a culture war win against an outspoken critic of the GOP. And admittedly, yes, Gunn's tweets were distasteful and not a good look for him. I mean, he joked about pedophilia. It's understandable that people who didn't recognize the bullshit source of this controversy, i.e. Cernovich, could have mistakenly bought into the idea that Gunn did a no-no many years prior. But it's worth noting that Gunn had already apologized for those tweets before, and that he had clearly changed as a person since making those original edgelord comments many years prior. We already knew about the tweets, yet Disney still caved to the demands spewing from a controversy that was started in completely bad faith, and thus threw Gunn's career and the Guardians franchise into jeopardy. Though thankfully, roughly 9 months later, Disney eventually realized it made a mistake and ultimately rehired James Gunn, mostly due to how heavily Hollywood insiders, fans, and members of the Guardians of the Galaxy cast criticized the reasons for Gunn's original firing, and thus Disney brought Gunn back, even though he was working on projects at Marvel Studios' rival over at DC by directing the Suicide Squad and creating Peacemaker, i.e. a show that's basically perfect and proves that more show opening credit sequences should feature all of the show's characters dancing together, all while being divorced of any context. But anyway, the point I'm trying to make here is that James Gunn landed on his feet despite the circumstances. Yet still, when originally firing James Gunn, Disney showed its hand on how it operates and showcased how little it can value those who create the art it profits from. It represents a company that is impulsive and is willing to remove creators from projects if those said creators don't perfectly fit into a specified box of how Disney wants them to be, which is something that has a lot of commonalities with the High Evolutionaries' modus operandi. Which, yes, we are now officially back on topic after 3 whole minutes of being sidetracked. What a rabbit hole that was. I really might need to check my doctor for a potential ADHD diagnosis. But with that being said, summarizing the whole James Gunn and Disney debacle was critical for this video essay, mostly because it's important to note that the Disney critique that the High Evolutionary represents has a personal history with the movie's director. Hell, the conflict in the movie even showcases the way to combat that struggle, and the way to combat it is in how friends and supporters of the person affected need to join together in order to fight back against a very powerful foe, which in terms of the High Evolutionary means how Rocket's chosen Guardians family of Quill and company must support Rocket, and in terms of Gunn, that meant that Gunn's friends in the Guardians cast must support him and argue against Disney's decision to remove him. There are just a lot of similarities here, because between the High Evolutionary's treatment of Rocket and Disney's treatment of Gunn, there are clear parallels. Furthermore, the High Evolutionary, like Disney, views everything created under him as his intellectual property that he can do with as he seems fit. In fact, he doesn't believe a being like Rocket is a person with his own autonomy. Instead, the High Evolutionary believes that he owns Rocket and his other creations, and that he can do whatever he wants to them. And that's honestly very similar to Disney's treatment of its IP. After all, Disney has a history of interfering with projects. It can view IP as being mere vehicles to justify theme parks, fights tooth and nail in order to prevent its IP from entering the public domain, and can do something like remove shows from Disney Plus, all while having non-viable alternatives to access those shows, because damn the consequences and blowback from the concerns of movie and TV preservation efforts, i.e. if there is a legal way to access these shows and movies in the future, and disempowers the multitudes of people who puts their heart and soul into a given project. Disney just sees its art as IP, very much like how the High Evolutionary views the beings that he creates, which is just another reason as to why he is such a good villain. Similar to Disney's business ethics, the man is contemptible. Because where Disney views its IP as belonging to them, rather than all the creatives who put their heart and soul into a project, the High Evolutionary views the autonomous beings that he creates as belonging to him. And in that regard, Disney and the High Evolutionary have a lot in common, which truly gives this movie a lot of thematic depth. So yes, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 is pretty damn great, and I love it. But with that being said, I need to warn potential audience members about how dark this movie is. See, Guardians of the Galaxy 3 is a hard PG-13 movie, and part of the reason for that is due to the animal cruelty that some of the fictionalized characters in the movie experience. Because, you know, the high evolutionary experiments on animals, because he's a fucking prick. Like, let's be clear, if seeing fictionalized animals in pain is too much for you, you might want to reconsider seeing Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. And while sure, I would not go so far as to refer to the movie as Marvel Studios' Watership Down, it definitely pushes a lot of emotional buttons that I know some folks won't be able to take, because it will probably make a lot of the audience cry, wow, some kid is gonna have a really awkward birthday. Still, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 is a great movie and a terrific capper to James Gunn's oddball yet heartfelt trilogy. The characters are witty and fun, and the action is exciting, but it's the emotionally resonant story and themes that give those aforementioned fun characters and that aforementioned exciting action true weight and purpose. It's a movie that makes the audience feel something other than the visceral thrill of watching a big budget spectacle, which is unlike many Marvel productions these days, which have been inconsistent in quality, where even the good films tap out at the B+ range rather than being a true S-tier Marvel movie. And that's even before we discuss disastrous misfires like whatever the fuck Thor Love and Thunder was supposed to be, which was just god-awful, no pun intended, and highlighted how the MCU has seen better days. But thankfully, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 is an S-tier Marvel movie, because with this film, the narrative, character drama, and the emotional stakes are taken with sincerity, and as a result, the audience connects with the action. We have a reason to care. And with that, that was the video. I hope you enjoyed it. Please leave a like rating, share, subscribe, ring the bell, and leave a comment telling me what you thought of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. Also, please consider checking out my Patreon page. $1 a month gets you onto this credit sequence, and $5 a month allows you to make review and essay requests. The link to my Patreon is in the description. And speaking of Patreon, I just want to thank my patrons, particularly my high tier ones in Samantha Devlin, Mom, and Morgan. Thank you so much for supporting what I do. Love y'all.